right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. So today we are joined with two of the largest MDBs, Asian Development Bank, or ADB, and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or EBRD. In the past 2 days, we heard presentations from Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank Group, and Islamic Development Bank. Role of the MDBs in both lending and in catalyzing private capital to developing countries is extremely important. We heard from the Ukraine PPP unit yesterday how EBRD is playing a critical role in the country's reconstruction and mobilization of private sector already. ADB is planning a similar role. MDBs themselves must be agile in adjusting to the needs and demands of the countries, and at the same time, they need to innovate to be future relevant. Climate action is one of the demands and needs, which no organization can ignore. Today, we will hear from ADB and EBRD on their integration of climate action in complementing their PPP program. So we have an excellent panel here today representing two regional MDBs. Takeo is a director of ADB's Office of Public-Private Partnership and manages ADB's transaction advisory services for PPP projects in South Asia, Central Asia, and 2 countries in Southeast Asia. He has over 25 years of experience in private sector infrastructure finance and public-private partnerships across Asia and the Pacific. Prior to the current position, Takeo built proven track records as a project finance banker for nearly 15 years, including more than 12 years in ADB's private sector operations department. He also worked on policy formulation and coordination on international development finance from the Ministry of Finance in Japan. Next, we have Matthew. He's the Director of Sustainable Infrastructure Policy and Project Preparation at EBRD, covering the energy, transport, and municipal sectors. His work covers upstream policy support, PPP transaction advisory, and project preparation, technical due diligence, and implementation issues. Matthew also leads the bank's sustainable infrastructure advisory activities dedicated to improving the quality of advice and efficiency of project preparation for both PPPs and public sector-based projects. He's also active in various MDB, G20, and OECD working groups on global infrastructure support activities. Previously, he was the head of Infrastructure Policy Unit at EBRD from 2014 to 2018 and Senior Urban Transport Specialist at EBRD from 2008 to 2013. I'm not doing justice to their long careers, so please do read their full profiles on the AirMeet speakers' profiles. I would also like to hear from you, the audience, during the session, so please put your questions in the questions tab on the right. There's a chat function also, so please comment, say anything, and respond to other audience as well, as we want to ensure that this is a live and interactive session. I will pick few messages and questions for the panelists after their presentations. So first, we'll start with 2 presentations from both Taki and Matthew to give us an overview of what their organization is doing in the PPP space. So the question for both of you, can you share with us what your institution is doing on climate smart PPPs, types of capacity building activities, and development of tools to support the PPP activities in your regions? So first, we go to Takeo. Over to you, Takeo.
Thank you, Jyoti. Good afternoon for most of you who are in Europe. And then for me, it's actually after dinner time. Greetings from Japan. So let me just, present a few kind of, things that we are doing on the PPP space from Asian Development Bank. Okay. Today, I'd like to just provide the general, overview of ADB's approach to PPP, and followed by the recent example to support the PPP program in Uzbekistan. ADB actually is operating under the 7 operational priorities, so-called under the Strategy 2030. And then we also have 3 different approaches. And then climate change is one of the key themes amongst those 7 priorities. And then I just, try to mention a little later, but we have a very ambitious commitment in terms of the promoting climate change projects. At least 75% of number of ADB committed operations by 2030 should be climate change related. And then also total of $100 billion from ADB's own resources from 2019 to 2030 should be provided. And then in doing so, categorization and then mobilization of financial resources is also very important. And then we try to mobilize 2.5 times of co-financing or private sector resources along with our own investment. And then PPP is embedded across all those different thematic priorities, particularly climate change. And then as a kind of, a matter of functions that the organization has, ADB can provide different products. Of course, you must be familiar with the sovereign lending. Also, we are increasing private sector operations, commercial kind of financing through debt and equity. And then from my office, Office of PPP, we provide transaction advisory services to the government clients to prepare and then develop bankable transactions, which can attract good interest from the market. In addition, we also have knowledge and then partnership activities. We also have a grant and then technical assistance, which is also supported by various different donors through trust funds. So we try to combine those different products and the modalities to basically provide a holistic solutions to our client countries. In relation to PPP, I mean, generally we look at 4 different pillars as just presented here. So on the left-hand side is more policy level interventions, including advocacy and then capacity development, as well as also developing enabling environment, basically to promote those frameworks and then also procedures which can.
Takeo, we cannot see the slides moving. I don't know if you're presenting. Can you go into the presentation mode and see if it moves?
Okay, just a moment. So it didn't show the presentation.
We could see the first slide. Maybe you want to go to the PDF.
It didn't move. Okay.
Yeah, it didn't move.
Then. Okay. So this was the basically slide that we are talking about, including 7 operational priorities and then 3 approaches. Okay, good. And then also, this is basically the slide which captures all different modalities and then also products that ADB can offer. And then as I mentioned, we try to put things into one package depending on the need and then also demand from our client countries. And then as I just, come from the advisory operations, I just wanted to, emphasize this slide. I mean, this is a kind of overall approach by ADB to PPPs, I mean, including 4 different pillars. On the left-hand side is a policy level intervention, capacity development, and then also creation of enabling environment. On the right-hand side is more transaction level support. The third one is project development preparation, basically mainly through these advisory services. And then the last one on the right-hand side is a financing, both from sovereign lending as well as also non-sovereign lending. And then increasingly, we also put emphasis on credit enhancement products such as guarantees. And then our transaction advisory services actually has a relatively short history in ADB's operations, but in the past 4 years, we were able to close 10 different projects in different countries. And then perhaps, I should say, apart from 2 road projects, all other renewables or urban projects are actually addressing climate change and then also a reduction of CO2. The next one is basically the introduction of a recent experience in Uzbekistan. I mean, Uzbekistan basically, got a new administration and then basically started the process of reform. And then PPP was one of the key policy agenda for them. They started this PPP program from 2018 by creation of the PPP Development Agency. They also introduced the new PPP law in 2019, and then ADB's engagement started around the time. Since then, it's been probably only less than 4 years, but I should say that the country has achieved quite a lot of things successfully, which may be typically done by in 10 years, in different countries. And then recently, there are a number of projects which are getting to the stage of the commercial closure and then financial closure, and then the pipeline is getting robust. So right now, the prospect of the country's program is quite good. And then in supporting the PPP program in the country, ADB tried to basically mobilize a different support at different levels. This also relates to the previous slide, which I showed 4 different pillars. But then again, as I explained, we try to combine this policy level support and then capacity building, as well as also transactional kind of support through preparation and then financing. By combining all those kind of important ingredients and then provide holistic and then integrated services, we believe that sustainable PPP program can be more smoothly developed, and then it also continues on its own way. And in that context, I also want to emphasize one kind of key point, which is basically a positive feedback loop between policy support and then transaction support. So I just mentioned we have actually worked on many transactions in Uzbekistan, and then some of them have reached commercial close recently. But at the same time, the country went through the process of amending the PPP law and to make it more robust and then more project friendly. And then our ongoing experience of transactions actually were reflected to the discussion of the amendments of the PPP law. And then eventually it just passed in 2020. So it also provided a good boost to the PPP program to be further developed. Based on that, again, as just mentioned, we have actually worked on key different infrastructure sectors, district heating, wastewater treatment, renewable energy, and then also social sectors, including public schools. This is one example which is perhaps more related to addressing the climate change agenda. This is a solar project, the first solar project which we supported. This is a 457 megawatt project, but an ADB actually committed to basically support multiple projects up to 1 gigawatt. So this is a phase 1. This was recently closed, and then the winning bidder was Masdar from UAE. But then on the left-hand side, I showed ADB's role, which actually spans quite widely, from master plan exercise to identify the right location, also project level support for preparation and then tender management. And then during that time, we also simultaneously provided capacity building support to the government stakeholders so that they can actually develop their kind of institutional capacity by sort of learning by doing kind of exercise. And then eventually, as I mentioned, financing products were also brought in from ADB's menu. And then we actually structured a partial credit guarantee, which provides a protection for the off-taker's payment risk in the country. Uzbekistan actually went through the whole lot of reform process, including the power sector. So they actually unbundled the integrated utility to generation, transmission, and then distribution. So therefore, the capacity and the creditworthiness of the off-taker was considered a kind of weakness in the whole picture. So the government still provided a payment guarantee, but at the same time, ADB further kind of strengthened by its own guarantee, so that the payment mechanism is secured from the investor's perspective. And then based on that, successfully, the tender was concluded, and then the project actually attracted a record low tariff in the country. So this is a overview. I mean, again, ADB and then probably, Matthew and then other MDB colleagues can do something similar, but quite a lot of things to support PPPs, particularly addressing those climate change agenda. So it is, I think, good to engage MDBs as early as possible. I mean, we could probably bring in probably unique resources, including some of the grant, resources, and then of course, experience from different countries, and then based on a long-term relationship with our member countries, we may be able to provide some tailored, solution depending on the needs, and then we have a kind of probably long-term patience, basically to work with the government and then to make things happen when there's a challenging environment. Perhaps I just stop here and then maybe give it back to Jyoti. Thank you.
Thank you, Takeo. Now we're going to go to Matthew. So I'm just going to share the file on the screen. And Matthew, let me know if you can see it.
Okay, I think it's coming up now. Very good. Excellent. Well, Jyoti, and to the whole team at the WAPPP, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us. And Takeo, great to be with you as well. Let me just try to provide in a few minutes, where I think things are heading in the PPP advisory area for EBRD. And by extension, perhaps a new trend might be emerging for other MDBs as well in their support of governments. Let me, before I go into some of the slides, let me first say on the specific question of resilient PPPs. I think it's important to keep in mind that all of the MDBs are in a quite a detailed process of developing Paris Agreement alignment methodologies, and so that includes the sort of trickier areas such as roads. If you think about the road sector, which is obviously critical for connectivity, we need to make sure these are EV ready. So for e-mobility, they need to have the infrastructure in place to help that transition happen smoothly. If you think about social infrastructure, these need to be green building standards and certifications for what we do with schools and hospitals and the like, any type of built environment. So I think I just wanted to set that out. We're very conscious of this, and this is important because we're all signing up to in varying timelines, but eventually we're all getting to effectively 100% commitment to Paris-aligned investments, and those include PPPs. Okay, let's go to the slides, please. Next slide, please, Jyoti, if you can. Very good. So obviously EBRD being quite oriented towards the private sector, we have quite deep involvement. There's 40 plus PPPs that we've financed over the last 25 years or so, and so you can see the range there just to give you an idea. Next slide, please. And continue, please. Yep. Okay, so I mean, part of what we do, obviously, beyond the downstream financing, is indeed what I call the upstream policy and preparation work, and that takes the form of really making sure the institutional setting is right, the regulations are right, the legal frameworks are enabled for private sector transactions to occur and to occur successfully. So that's really this kind of the heart of what I call midstream in the project cycle. That's where you do the project preparation. That's where you do the PPP advisory. And we're deeply involved in this now, and I'll explain a bit of what we've achieved to date. Next slide, please. And again, thank you. Okay, so the team that I have the pleasure of leading, within the advisory area, really is it's sort of the nuts to bolts, beginning to end type support. So we'll do, the early sort of market sounding, the assessment of the business case for investments. We'll take on the mandate to work with governments side by side, all the way through to the tender preparation, the commercial and financial close. So it really is, from beginning to end type support, and that's how we establish things. Because at the end of the day, our goal here is to help governments see actual investments happening, i.e., reach financial close. So we're with our government clients all the way through to that sort of final outcome. Next slide, please. Right. So this is our basic approach. How we set this up is that you can see our advisory unit on the left. We sign a formal agreement, which is effectively a mandate with the public sector. We then prepare the PPP tender all the way through to the eventual commercial and financial close with the private sponsor on the right. To make this sustainable from a funding standpoint, and I think it also aligns incentives quite nicely, is that we require then the private sector concessionaire to reimburse the at cost the effort that we've made under the mandate to prepare the PPP. So that's that reimbursement of the project preparation costs. Also, to align as incentives, we're quite clear: if there's no financial close, we write off all the costs. So we're putting this pre-funding at risk, because we believe in it, and we're very selective about what we do with governments, and it's a partnership. But we also face the consequences of a failed tender, and so I think that's right and proper for EBRD. Next slide, please. So if you click one more, I think it's coming through. Yeah, so we've got a nice unit built out now. We've got nine people working at this, and we're adding a few more as we expand. They're regionally allocated, with two of them actually embedded within key markets: Uzbekistan and Central Asia, excuse me, and in Greece. And I'll explain why in a moment as we get to examples. Next slide, please. Yes, and so this is what we've achieved since the beginning of our approach in 2015. We have 17 mandated projects, about 4 billion in total investment value, and 4 projects are effectively at financial close now. And you can see there's a big concentration in transport and healthcare, but we're now working across education, the energy sector, water and wastewater, and so on. So it's quite a nice, diverse set of projects at this point. Next slide, please. Okay, and you can see that there's 14 different countries, and the funding, the majority of the funding has come from our internal resources, but we've also worked very closely with the Global Infrastructure Facility, who's really doing a great job in providing funding and support and all of their abilities to help push in the same direction, and that's been a great partnership that we're continuing. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's some of the successful advisory. We had a great sort of momentum going in Ukraine, and the awful war that's occurred, of course, has put all of that on hold. We had two ports that were successfully tendered, Port Kherson and Olvia. We did that in partnership with IFC. It was very good joint work. We have also the Sofia Airport that closed 2 years ago now this summer. An excellent, sort of outcome to that. And then the 6th of October dry port, which is really a green logistics play, because there's a modal shift from trucking, from lorries moving containers into the country over to rail, and that project is the first of what we hope will be a whole program. We've got a second one now coming at the 10th of Ramadan that's under procurement, and there'll be a third and fourth, I'm quite sure. And so that's quite nice to see that happen, and that's the first of its kind in Egypt, which is such an important country in terms of logistics and transport flows. And then in Uzbekistan, we have a successful wind tender, a whole program coming, and others are working in the solar sector, as Takeo said, and that's so it's a really nice push on renewables in Uzbekistan. Okay, next slide, please. So now I want to talk really about what I think is a new trend. At least this is emerging for EBRD with some of our countries, and I wanted to explain it to you. This is essentially this concept of local national project preparation facilities. You know, if you think about it, the MDBs have been working, you know, quite concertedly at helping governments prepare PPPs, and you know we're getting there, but it is. I think slower than we all would have hoped for, if we're quite honest with each other. We think that actually a way of sort of scaling this is to create these national platforms, embed the work in a very dedicated manner in the countries that want to go deeper with PPPs. So Greece for us was the first country that approached us when we started batting around some ideas of how would you actually conceive of a national PPF. So we worked with the ministry, the Greek government, with the Ministry of Development, and they committed substantial funds, 20 million euros from their own budget. They contracted us at EBRD to act as their agent to prepare all of these tenders. So there was a pipeline of sort of 15 or so PPPs that they had prioritized, and they made a lot of sense. We engage for them. We run the whole procurement process, mobilize all the advisors, co-supervise them, and then we lead it all the way through as we've been doing before. But because we had the pre-funding in place, we had a dedicated joint team of Greek specialists with international specialists and EBRD pushing behind this and doing it in an efficient manner. We've been able to achieve really excellent results thus far. And if you can go to the next slide, please, I'll show you what this looks like. Yeah, so you can see as I was describing the scope, but the important thing is that within the first 18 months of starting this in the beginning of last year, there are 7 PPPs under preparation, and I think that is a massive sort of upscaling at the relative level of Greece. And it's due to this approach. I'm quite convinced this makes a lot of sense. It's a win-win for the country, for the market, and it just gives that certainty of dedication. Next slide, please. So what we've done now is we want to, and we are expanding this concept with other willing partners. And the first country that came to us following Greece is Uzbekistan. Now, this is a very detailed slide, but I'll leave it with you. Essentially, it's a national PPF, what we call the Project Development Facility. We signed a formal MOU with Uzbek partners about a month ago in Tashkent, and essentially it's a 50-50 sort of contribution. The Uzbek government will put in 10 million into their facility. EBRD will marshal 10 million additional, so we'll have a 20 million fund. We'll set up this local development facility that will be embedded within the government of Uzbekistan that does the PPPs, the PPPDF, PPPDA, excuse me, and we'll work with them with additional resources on the ground to push this forward. So they have, just like Greece, they have a list of very, very well-defined projects that have been pre-screened. We will have the funding in place, and we'll have additional dedicated resources to do this. We think this will be able to achieve great results, just like as is occurring in Greece. And I'll finish with the final slide, which just gives you the flow of the organogram behind this. And so you can see the UPDF in the middle of that, where EBRD contributes funds, the Uzbek government contributes funds. We work very closely with the existing PPPDA, and then the mandates flow down to either EBRD, to our own unit, or to the option of going directly to the private sector, facilitated by the UPDF. And I think that's actually quite well and proper, that governments who are maturing with PPPs, as Uzbekistan is doing, go directly to the private sector. They need some guidance still, they need to have proper support for it, but they go directly to the private sector advisory industry. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because that is precisely where eventually countries will end up. They will do these programs on their own. That's the goal here. and the MDBs, can facilitate that transition over the next year. So I'll end there, and we're very excited about taking this for us to kind of the next level of national PPFs, and really happy to get into all the other questions and discussions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Takeo. Takeo, if you want to switch on your camera, and we're going to move to question and answers. Really, actually, both presentations very interesting. I personally learned something what ADB and EBRD are doing. I'm sure the audience did too. So actually, let me start with first with my own question, and then I will take, actually, audience is already putting some questions on the Q&A. So my first question to both of you, we heard from Climate Policy Initiative on the first day of this conference that most climate finance globally is coming from the public sector, and second from the private sector, but mostly from corporates in terms of, for example, electric vehicles. In 2019 to 20, total climate finance was $632 billion globally, while the needs are between $5 to $6 trillion. So the question is, are MDBs playing a comparatively smaller role? We also know that most money from MDBs are going to climate finance as loans. So it's direct funding. Do you think MDBs have a bigger role to play? Are the products from MDBs to catalyze private sector financing saturated? What do you think?
Should I just come first? Yeah, from our side, I just quickly mentioned we have announced, committed to a very ambitious kind of target for providing climate finance directly, but at the same time, mobilizing and catalyzing is also a key, as you just mentioned just now. So I just wanted to touch on in two parts. The first, I mean, from its own resources, as you mentioned, I mean, ADB traditionally focuses on project lending, but at the same time, in this context, we are also looking at some policy reform-related loans basically to support the climate change agenda moving forward in those countries. So it's a combination of project and then policy, and then also we provide both sovereign and then non-sovereign financing depending on the needs and then suitability. In addition, in relation to mobilization and also we are now trying to deploy more sort of credit enhancement products, I mean, where appropriate. And then in addition, perhaps, this also overlaps with probably Matthew's kind of activities, but it is also important for us to actually, prepare and then deliver investable or bankable projects to attract those commercial financing resources. So in that respect, we also provide a very, again, comprehensive support. On project preparation side, but at also same time we support the government so that they can create a good environment, and then also including probably something which Matthew was mentioning. So it's very broad. And then again, we are trying to basically increase the volume of climate finance from ourselves, but then also at the same time from the market. Thank you.
Matthew?
Okay, great. Thanks, Jyoti, for the question. No, I think it's a very good one because there is indeed there are a lot of commitments being made, and I mean I just outlined very briefly on the EBRD side. Obviously following from COP26 in Glasgow, there's a lot of focus on, what are people actually going to do concretely, and it wasn't 100% there, but it is moving. For example, at EBRD, we committed by January of 2023. So that's coming up in just a little over half a year to 100% Paris-aligned financing. Okay, so that is having, I alluded to the methodology before. I mean, that's having already, and for several months now, real impact in terms of the types of projects we actually even consider preparing. So there are projects that are not going to fit within the new methodologies, and so I think all of us, to the extent that international financing with IFIs and so on will be involved, we need to think very carefully how to prepare these projects so that they do fit, so that they do achieve those higher outcomes, those cleaner outcomes. The second is another action that we're taking is about 6 months ago, again right around the time of COP26, we committed to a formal target of doubling the mobilization level. So the external private sector mobilization for EBRD. So on the back of our activities, there's a scorecard target that's very concrete, that's double what it is today by 2024. So that's another concrete action. I think a third thing I would point to, and I think this is a big area, and one that frankly developing countries, emerging market countries are looking toward, is the sort of energy transition that is achieved through the decommissioning of old, end of life or toward end of life fossil fuel thermal generation plants. So I'm talking about coal in particular. Now, obviously, the war in Ukraine has complicated this. But I think what countries are expecting, and I think the international donor community is really has to think hard about right now, is the funds it will take to help decommission those plants, and as a parallel action, creating new generation, clean generation to replace that, and both need to go hand in hand. The sums are substantial. I mean, I was discussing a few weeks ago and hearing about, we don't work there, but in South Africa there's an 8 billion plus program for decommissioning, but the money has to come from someplace, and it has to be quite concrete. And now on the generation side, I think the discussion has to move beyond solar and wind. I think we really do need to start thinking of further diversification. I mean, hydrogen's being talked about a lot. There are some countries that are actually moving quite concretely. We're really encouraged by Egypt, what they're doing there, and there could be a very, very big program coming. And I've heard about Brazil, for example, on hydrogen, green hydrogen generation. But we need to strengthen grids. We need to think about battery storage. We need storage in general. Could be pump hydro. So it's complex, but that push. If we're talking about climate finance, a lot of resources need to now go into the decommissioning to accelerate that transition, and then come forward with new clean generation. It's kind of an obvious point, but I mean, the sums are tremendous, and the commitment has to be rock solid. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Takeo. I'm going to now take some questions from the audience. We have 10 minutes. So let me show the question on stage. And whoever wants to go first, just go ahead.
Can you read it fully out? Because I can't see it on my screen. Can you read the whole question?
Sure. How are the MDBs PPP project risk model implemented to manage better the transaction of loans and grants allocated to the developing countries? I guess you can talk about your project risk model for PPPs. How do you incorporate and how do you align your own risk model?
Takeo, would you like me to start, or would you like to have a go?
Sure. I mean, just briefly, if I kind of understand correctly, I mean, we have certain kind of benchmark risk allocations, and then also at the same time, it's a kind of combination of our internal kind of assessment as well as also market sounding exercise. So again, depending on the country or sector, certain feedback could be also different. So in a way, I mean, it's not really kind of a straightforward structured kind of risk model, but we basically go by a combination of those few different things. Let me just stop here, and then Matthew, if you have anything
sure
from your side.
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. I think the first thing I say, there's a number of elements for this. I mean, focusing on the upstream advisory, kind of area in the project cycle. We, obviously have a thorough screening process that is going to quite detailed 30 plus key questions that we go through before we engage and put significant resources into approaching a government and saying you've expressed interest in X PPP, and before engaging and signing a mandate, obviously we need to make sure that this is going to be a viable, a good solid probability that this can be successfully tendered as a PPP. The other thing is that we at EBRD, we actually run before we again put any resources into preparing a PPP. We actually run our projects through our formal operations committee, our loan committee, if you will. The reason we do that is we want the wider bank of EBRD, the wider institutions, all the departments, our credit department, our legal department, and so on, to opine on whether they think, independently of our advisory unit, whether they think this is viable as a PPP. Is this something that eventually someone will want to finance, whether it's EBRD or others? So I think those are kind of the main checks. Of course, I should say the legal environment is critical. And Takeo mentioned, how the work on the PPP law in Uzbekistan. I mean, that was absolutely, critical. And we have a program called the Legal Transition team, an initiative that has worked on nearly 20 PPP laws in the region where EBRD works, and that's been running for 15 years now, and that's very, very important as well. You can't tender things if you don't have a law to do it within. But again, kind of obvious points, but I think that's the way we look at it, and we think that by running a project proposal through those paces and those checks, there's a much better likelihood that things can result in a successful tender.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Takeo. Next question is quite relevant, and actually, so it says, "Dear distinguished panel, thank you for this opportunity. Please kindly share your understanding of how to track record of project delivery with regard to climate change agenda. Is there a specific approach in Uzbekistan?" And if I can just turn this question to say, what is the entry point for EBRD and ADB in approaching, for example, the Uzbekistan program? Is it the project or is it the climate change? I mean, how do you prioritize your screening criteria, for example, in approaching a project?
Matthew, you want to go first this time?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Great question. Well, I mean, as I said, I mean, I think the new thing that we signed up to is I think that looking through things from the Paris Agreement standpoint. I mean, those methodologies. So that's feeding through to all the advisory work we do. And so it is informing the way, for example, the Tashkent Samarkand road PPP that we're currently preparing, the way that's being assessed, the way it's being looked at in terms of being a sort of EV ready road, the resilience, the aspects of sort of being climate resilient in terms of a design standard, all of those things that on one level it's the project in front of us that we look at, but the other is really taking a view towards the programmatically the types of projects we get into. And I think if sticking with Uzbekistan, I mean, I think at a recent conference we were all at in Tashkent, which was I have to pass a compliment to ADB. It was wonderfully organized by ADB and the government. There was a huge emphasis on social infrastructure, and I think that's also makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at schools, you look at health, you look at university dormitories, all of these areas, there's a critical need, but you can do them in a you know, with these green standards in mind, as I talked about, the green building certifications, make these environments that are really energy efficient. They can conclude things like rooftop solar, you know, they can be kind of net zero buildings. I mean, this is the future of the way, you know, everyone talks about build back better. That is what it's all about. It's building super high quality kind of assets, and social infrastructure is a great place to be able to do it. So.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree, you know, what Matthew said. I mean, of course, you know, climate change is a key element, but at the same time, when we, you know, start, you know, discussion with the government clients, they always have certain kind of, you know, needs to develop infrastructure itself. So the way the conversation could be developed is, okay, if we try to look at certain kind of proposal, then we try to bring in, let's say, a climate change lens, and then trying to figure out where we could actually add those, you know, climate features into the project design and the specifications, as Matthew said. So in that way, I mean, actually, you know, many of those infrastructure projects can actually turn into, you know, climate related projects, even if it is a transport, you know, social, urban infrastructure. So it's not only, you know, renewable energy, clean energy type of things. And then we are trying to basically, you know, broaden the solutions for climate change through different infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Takeo. We only have 2 minutes, so very quick. I just want to show there are two questions. There's one specifically for Matthew on Ukraine project preparation facility, and there's a question from Natalia on political risks. And if you can just maybe combine both of these questions in your response very quickly, and then we will close in literally in 1.5 minutes. Over to you, Matthew.
Okay. Yeah. Great question, JP. Yeah. Indeed, you know, we were, based on all of the really great momentum and you know, the results, frankly, we were starting to have jointly with IFC in Ukraine. I mean, we were on the cusp of creating, you know, a dedicated facility. I mean, we were working very closely with Ukrainian government, the ministry, Spilno. I'm not sure if they've been here, but you know, it's a great unit, a great team. And then the war happened, and so, you know, now what we're thinking about is, you know, in the reconstruction, when there will be a critical role for private sector investment in Ukraine, how do we streamline it? How do we make it as efficient as possible? It has to happen, you know, in an accelerated manner, and they have to be, you know, in a way sort of simplified. And then PPPs are inherently complex, but we need to find a way to work together, international kind of bodies with the Ukrainian government. We had a great start going, and I know that there is a lot of willingness. So yes, I you know, I'm all for sort of creating a dedicated platform, a dedicated facility, and working with all the other institutions that will be involved. It'll be a big effort, but indeed, this is a hugely important thing, and we're already doing a lot of thinking and planning and anticipating when we can just get going with it as soon as the horrible war, you know, comes to an end. So.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Matthew. I think the questions are many. Obviously, we cannot cover everything. There are more questions for Takeo also, but we are out of time. And I really want to thank both of you to come and present in the WAPP Annual Congress. A lot of interest for both of your institutions to share with us. And till next time, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.